He's kind of like the Joe Rogan of the hospitality industry right now.
This episode is brought to you by Enterprise Mobility. From fleet management to flexible truck rentals to technology solutions, Enterprise Mobility helps businesses find the right mobility solutions so they can find new opportunities. Because if your business is on the road, they want to make sure it's on the road to success. Enterprise Mobility, moving you moves the world. Find your road at enterprisemobility.com.
What's up, Slick Talkers? This episode is brought to you by our friends at Send Squared. If you have not already signed up or followed Send Squared online, wherever you get your social media content and engagement, then you need to go to sendsquared.com. Check them out today. They are the hospitality CRM that enables you as a hospitality entrepreneur to actually have true hospitality moments and using your data, like we talked about in this episode, to its full advantage. So thank you to our friends at Send Squared. Go to sendsquared.com today to learn more. All right, Slick Talkers, welcome back to this episode where I'm excited because for a while now, I've actually been feeling like the show has been going a little too far off the path of where we started the show 7 years ago, just around this time that this episode is coming out. And Nathan just makes my excitement for hospitality come back alive and definitely reaffirm that we are going down the right direction moving forward by bringing hospitality to our core of conversation. And on this episode, you're going to hear about how Nathan imagines the amazing, or actually executing and crafting an amazing guest experience through digital touchpoints and physical. And what does hospitality truly mean to him, which I love his definition at the end. But one of the little nuggets I want to give you right now is that true hospitality in today's world can begin in the DMs, in treating your digital engagement the way you would physical engagement. And so I'm going to let that sit. Let's welcome Nathan Woods to the show as he's going to tell us his ideal way of crafting a great guest experience. You're listening to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, a podcast for those who are in and around the hospitality industry who love, live, and breathe what they do. You can join us for candid and unscripted conversations with hospitality experts and founders as we go deeper into their personal stories while they're sharing their triumphs and trials that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Wil Slickers, and you're listening to an episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Now, let's begin. Nathan Woods, welcome to Slick Talk. How are we doing today?
I'm great. I'm a little fogged in the Northwest, but man, it's great to talk to you. Now it's been a long time of chit-chatting over the different social spheres and excited to just engage and talk about the idea of enhancing guest experience.
Yeah, well, I love your journey. I've been, obviously, like you said, we've been communicating via social, whether it's Instagram or LinkedIn or kind of a little bit of both in between. And just hearing where you are passionate, I kind of got really captivated by your takeaways from the Welcome Conference, which we'll talk about later, but would love for you to kind of describe where this whole hospitality journey for you begins, because we're going to be talking for the listeners about crafting a great experiential journey for your business. So would love to know just like your own personal story.
Yeah, I mean, the best way I can describe it is really just a divine collision. Because it's when where I'm standing now, it's like, how the heck did I get here? But then you can look back over the course of the different experiences I've done, the different impacts and moments of my life that you're like, man, that all makes sense. But getting to where I was at, it's like, it didn't make sense when I was living in the moment. And, you know, for me, it legitimately started. My first job out of college was I was driving truck parts. It was 2009, not a lot of jobs, and that was the job. And so, but along the way, I was just driving all the time, and it was just one of those like, hey, when you're alone in the car, at least for me, that's like when the thoughts happen. And I just remember like, hey, what do you want to do? And it was just this very clear, like, create experiences for others or a space for others so that they can be fully alive in the things they do. And I didn't have a definition of that was hospitality at the time, but that led me to, hey, well, maybe a hospitality degree would make sense, because I was like, I'll just go get a master's degree and move. And so I went and got a master's degree in hospitality, and it actually went and got an emphasis on sports hospitality, which is a unique version of it.
Yeah, very unique.
Yeah, and it kind of was focused on the hospitality part of this, like the guest experience, but also more of the elevated hospitality within sporting events. And my job right out of that was here in Eugene, Oregon, we host some of the world's biggest track and field events annually. And I mean, in 2021, we hosted the world championships alongside Berlin, London, all this, and then Eugene. And so for 5+ years,
Eugene, Oregon, next to Berlin and London.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, but we are, the birthplace of Nike and all things track. And every year we host one of the bigger, probably top 5 track meet. And so that was kind of I know I want to be in events. I want to be I knew sports, and I was in this town. So that was kind of the first move into it, was running VIP hospitality and a little bit of athlete hospitality for some of these big Olympic trials in 2012, a World Junior Championships in 2014, and some smaller events in between. And that was my first little taste of building an environment that people are welcomed to. And for me, it was always this, like, generally people are coming to an event to, it's the same thing with our hospitality we're in now. Like, they're escaping something, whether it's for enjoyment or like they need to get out. And this can be a space where we can give them a little bit of joy. And that was my focus for the 4 years I was doing that. I was like, let's just bring joy to people at this event and make them feel welcome. So that was the first time, like, again, I had no definition to what I knew now of, like, hey, I know this person really likes this type of soda. I'm going to make sure that's in-house. Or, hey, they like this wine, or this is their favorite food. And after years, you're like, that's just there waiting for them, versus like just having the standard. And I got burnt out by events pretty quickly. That's, just really exhausted from events and just the lead up. And then it's like a 2-week blitz, and just kind of was ready for something different. And in that time, I had met some gentlemen that were wanting to start a business, a consumer goods business, an e-commerce brand. It was a company called Run Gum. Our founder was an Olympic runner, America's best Olympic 800-meter runner from 2007 through 2015. He was winning most of the U.S. championships, but he wanted a different way of getting caffeine into the system, so he thought about a gum. Him and his coach brought me on to be employee number 1 to figure it all out. Like, how do we build a company? And so that was a really fun time of, hey, we just learned. It wasn't this huge venture-backed thing. It was, hey, we just ordered way too many pallets of this caffeinated chewing gum. It's in a warehouse. We need to start shipping it out. As employee number 1, I just kind of wore all the hats. I had to learn how to design. I had to learn how to build a website. I had to learn how to do digital marketing and retention marketing and email marketing and all of that. And it was kind of the crash course MBA. You kind of hear it all the time, like, building the business is the best MBA. And it was all of that from a digital build out. And we ended up there's a lot of stories within that, but we ended up taking that company, from a small e-commerce company to eventually, to this day being sold nationwide in Target and Walmart. And so simple little product, and it was built by us engaging with our fans, our followers, our customers, and not just letting it be, hey, they bought a gum. I've always had this idea of, like, hey, your customers pay your salary. And so, like, if they're going to do that, I'm going to engage with them. And so we had ambassador groups and customer advisory boards, and we just built this thing on the momentum of the fans that we had. And that's what got us into retail and everything else. It wasn't anything else beyond that. And I remember as we built the team, and this kind of ties in the hospitality thing, is I remember, like, being burnt out a little bit from the workplace I had in the events, and writing kind of my own personal manifesto of how I was going to lead this team as I built it. And this was like when I was employee number 1, and it was how to be a hospitable leader. And just, again, drawing to this idea that hospitality is this idea of welcoming and making sure people feel they belong, believing that if they feel welcomed at the table, they're going to be willing to go with us down this journey. If they don't feel welcomed at the table, then it's going to be a hard journey to build. And so I like to now say I got sidetracked for a decade plus building an e-commerce brand, not thinking or really knowing at the time how relevant it was going to be when I jumped into hospitality and this new craze of, hey, direct booking might be a better way of doing things. And then realizing e-commerce had 5+ years ahead of the game as far as technologies and knows-hows than hospitality. Come post-COVID, we had raised some money. As we were trying to grow, we raised money pre-COVID. post COVID, we raised a little bit more and brought in some industry experts versus, us, know how kids who didn't know what we were doing. And in that time being like, well, I had a title of chief of staff, like just do everything.
Chief of staff.
My role of chief of staff was kind of like just less needed. And I was just ready for something a little different and kind of started. And I know pre-show, we talked about books a little bit. 2022, I just was like, went on to Amazon. I just started, if I typed in hospitality, and if there was a book, I ordered it. And it didn't matter if it was industry hospitality, a textbook from a school, or more from the faith perspective. Like, what is this idea of hospitality? And I just went deep into it. I was reading everything. And just really felt this bigger idea of what hospitality is, not just in business, but like when I step out my doorway, like how am I engaging my neighbors? And it started to just eat me away of like, it's time to get back into it. And it was just kind of that during that transition, I've kind of like trying to figure that out. I engaged with this darling Instagram of short-term rental meets resort by Bulk Farm Treehouse, which I've been following for a long time. Because I built a treehouse with my dad and his brothers, and a little bit of me built a treehouse around the same time. Founder is a bass player of Need to Breathe, who I've been following for a really long time. And they just posted a job, and I was like, it didn't really make sense for me to like apply for that job in the sense of like what it was needed, because I was probably overqualified for it. But I was like, hey, maybe at the very least it'd be fun to talk to him. But that 100%. Led to conversations, which led to a lot of alignment of what the opportunity is. And then for kind of transition away from Rungum and went into working with Bulk Farm Treehouse for 18 plus months. And that was kind of my first taste into true hospitality, industry hospitality, and got to apply kind of everything I learned from direct consumer business and everything else to help build their brand for a couple of years and lay some foundations for what they get to do now.
I was staying at a vacation rental and was super excited that I got to spend some time with my friends and my family and my nieces and my nephews without any of my household chores. Well, I got an unfortunate message from the host saying, hey, the cleaners didn't take out the trash bins, or hey, tomorrow is trash day. We really would love if you could take out the trash bin to the curb or the recycling bin to the curb, whatever day it was. And I immediately felt discouraged and kind of, really? I left my house and I left my normal day-to-day life with household chores like taking out the trash behind me. I'm on vacation. I shouldn't have to take out the trash in the sense of doing chores. And so our friends at Fido can ensure that you don't put that feeling onto your guests by making them feeling like they are still at home, still dealing with chores and still dealing with reality and life that they left behind while on vacation. So go to getfido.com/slick-talk. The link is in the show notes. Make sure that you let them know that Will from Slick Talk or Hospitality FM has sent you to learn more about Fido and their bin to curb valet service that ensures you never miss a trash day ever again. Thank you to our friends at Fido, and we are back to the episode with Nathan Woods. I love it. And there's a lot of things that you said. I kind of was taking some notes, kind of want to revisit and, talk about true example of Danny Meyer's concept, athletic hospitality, right? Where you're working with sports events, and sometimes the concept of athletic hospitality, which we were just talking about before this, is sometimes you're on the offensive, sometimes you're on the defensive. I'm curious in terms, and I promise there's a kind of a connecting point here, but in terms of getting your master's degree in hospitality and then going into the sports world, then to run Gum, always hear, and you probably heard this too, especially as a man of faith, hearing about, through certain sermons or other things around, we're running towards something or running away from something, right? And I'm curious for you got your master's degree, but then instead of going the traditional hospitality route, you went through sports, you went through a startup, you went through all these other routes. Do you feel like you were running away from the master's degree, or like how was your, not maybe running away, but what was kind of taking you down that path initially that had you more curious to go untraditional, if that makes sense, untraditional route of experience. And I think it's a very cool story, like to be able to serve these athletic teams. And like, that's just, I don't know. I'm getting into sports in my 30s. I was never into sports. So like now it's fascinating to me. But if you told me 5, 6, 7 years ago, like, all right, it's just a bunch of athletes. Who cares? Right. Like, but it's a super cool path. So
for me, I think there was this like desire and core like belief in hospitality, the posture of it. But I knew sports, right? Like I didn't know hotels. And I think that was probably the biggest like reason why I went that way. And I remember taking some initial classes on hotels and it didn't overly interest me.
Yeah.
Outside of, and it still kind of combines the sports and all that. I grew up in the Oregon Coast. Oregon Coast has this destination golf resort called Bandon Dunes. And I caddied there a little bit in high school. And that was always an inspirational experience for me. What not just what they did for their guests, but what it did for the community. So that was my only kind of like inkling of maybe traditional, but I was in Eugene. I wasn't there. And so that was a route for sports for me. And one quick story about, I think that one of the biggest like hospitable, purposeful moments that I think I took from there is one of the events that we hosted was International World Juniors event. And we had to work with the international governing body for track and field. And they had a head of hospitality for that. And like leading up to it, like he made us like, he gave us like this binder of like all the dignitaries and important people's images and all this so that we would prepare when they walk up. We're not, and there is that level. It was not, the dignitaries expected it versus it being true hospitality, but it didn't really like kind of remember, like bringing this, like preparing for people to show up, thinking of others before they got there, which is something that I know I've heard along the way as a definition for hospitality. It was like, man, just putting a little bit of effort prior to arrival to make people feel welcome goes a long way. And we had this binder of images, but that was one of the like true hospitable like toolkits things that I remember take from that I took on. But yeah, it was just more combining a heart and combining it with knowledge, and my knowledge was those two.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great answer. It also just sounds like, your experience from Run Gum, the people you serve will get you there. And that's what I wrote down in my notes. The people you serve will get you there because the way you approached it, creating these ambassador groups, the advisory board or a customer advisory board, it just is a great example of the people you serve. You said like, our customers pay my salary. I should engage them, right? Like, okay, that is such a next level way of thinking. And I think it goes into kind of the next question I wanted to ask you leading into the meat of the episode. This episode is titled Crafting an Amazing Guest Experience, right? Like, how do you craft this and where are the touch points? And you're not going to go into these touch points, but you got to go to the Welcome Conference by Will Guidara. There's an Unreasonable Hospitality poster on your wall right behind you for any of the listeners. Amazing book. I'm on my like third iteration of reading it because you just have to like let it really soak in. But I'm curious in the terms of the touch points that you saw, the touch points that you got to experience as an attendee of this conference. I think is super important to find outside of the industry examples to then find ways for us to get creative, because a lot of people listening are hoteliers or short-term rental operators, even restaurateurs. And so the touch points that you received for the Welcome Conference, I would love to know, just kind of walk us through as an attendee, what that was like and anything that you were inspired about that you think hospitality providers today could try to incorporate in their business. All right, Slick Talkers, not to interrupt, but the best thing for your business today is data collection, and using pre-arrival forms and other tools at your tool belt is super crucial. That's why our friends at Hostfully actually created amazing systems and products within their property management platform to enable you to get to know your guests even better. Whether it's through their unified inbox where you can message guests on every and all platforms without having to log into separate different accounts, while also having pre-arrival forms where you can insert your own questions around the guest's favorite drinks, the guest's favorite reasons for coming to this destination, what their trip is all about. Using that information then to surprise and delight your guests is super important. And you need a tool like Hostfully to ensure that you can execute great hospitality moments in your business. So go to hostfully.com, use the link in the show notes, schedule a demo with Frank. And if you sign up without scheduling a demo with Frank, then use the code HFM300 for $300 off onboarding. So that way you and your team are smooth sailing from there. after signing up for Hostfully. So thank you to our friends at Hostfully for partnering with this episode. And we are back to the episode with Nathan Woods.
Yeah, I mean, from the get-go, like, it's an impactful event when, like, if you don't get in there and get your ticket within like 30 seconds, you ain't going, right? Like, it's that kind of demand. And, the lead up, they kind of, there's some level of like exclusive, I won't say exclusive, like VIP-ness of it, but they kind of leave you a lot of like, hey, we're not going to tell you all you're going to do here. You're going to come experience, and who the speakers are, but beyond that. And it'd been the first time I attended the event this last year, and first time for me in New York. And so it was kind of just all a thing. But I remember the most, like, the thing I remember back, and I maybe tell this story more than anything about the event. The event's great. You hear awesome speakers. You get to experience amazing food. You get to have an awesome post party that is, like, for me, growing up in small town Oregon, going to New York, like, man, I've never experienced anything like this, let alone anything like that. And obviously Will and his team put so much effort into crafting that, and the speakers and the gifts that you get. But the part that, like, truly, like, I think back and, like, what do I remember almost most about it is walking up to the Lincoln Center where they had it in the upper northwest, I guess. And you walk up and you just start hearing all this, like, trumpets and drum lines and all that. And you're like, well, this is probably just New York, right? At least that was my first thought. And you get closer and it's getting louder, and you get up closer and it's a little louder. And then you realize, like, hey, they have welcome shirts on. And this is how they welcomed you. It's just this, like, celebration band, and you gets everyone kind of jazzed and pumped up. And I just remember thinking, like, the effort and thinking of that little touch point. It's before you walked into the door of the building. It was before you really got into the event. It was like, hey, it's starting now. And thinking of that, like, how that sets the tone. I think, and we'll talk about it later, like, I think when people go on, whether it's a trip, experience your brand and e-commerce level, like, they're generally like 3-4 impressions that they're going to take with them. They're going to remember their arrival. They're going to have 1 or 2 memories in the middle, and they remember the departure, right? Those are, everything else is kind of left to some level. And so, like, how can you, like, set up those key moments to be something that is memorable and makes them feel something? But that's one specifically. Like, it's a great event. I recommend, if you can be there ready at like 12:01 Eastern time to get your ticket to go. But it's one of those, like, you just feel, I just felt like pumped to be there.
Well, a couple of things you said that really got me thinking and really actually excited. I was talking to Dan and Rena, who are the founders of Boutique. They're now out in the Seattle area, but were previously in Texas. They came to our retreat where we got to meet Horst Schulze and experience this type of hospitality from the Ritz-Carlton co-founder perspective, right? Like, this hospitality school. But they were telling me back in the old days on HomeAway, before it was Vrbo and all this stuff, like, when you got a booking on that platform, you'd open up the app or you'd open up, your email, and confetti would pop out, right? Like, you got a booking, like, holy crap, you got a guest. This is it. And it was kind of like you said, that welcome of celebration, right? When you're walking up. And I thought the same thing when I went to New York for the first time, because I was like, oh, it's just New York, right? Like, there's people all over the streets singing, dancing, doing all sorts of things. But the fact that you guys had, like, a celebration of your anticipated arrival was so inspiring. And it's like, I think we've lost touch of this, like, celebrational moment kind of creation in our business. HomeAway or Vrbo no longer do confetti when you get a booking. It's like, okay, it's like there's no dopamine hit to it.
One of the most impactful things in my hospitality journey was 2019, 2020, feeling just the weight of a lot of things. Yeah. Fatherhood, marriage, building a business, and all of that, and was in a kind of a depressive level. And I went to a retreat place in Montana called Refuge. And it's a fly fishing based retreat. And they're just trying to keep leaders in the game, and they do it. But one of the things that's like, and it's just one of those, such an amazing thing is you have this really long driveway driving up to it. As you get closer, they have all these like 19, 20, and 25-year-old kind of rough dudes who are your guides, and they serve you all week. But they're like, you show up, you start hearing the music, and they're on tables, they're singing, and they're just like cheering you on, like you're getting announced for like the starting lineup
Yeah.
of some game, and the level of feeling of like, man, I feel welcome here because they're like so excited for me to be here. I think that's kind of what your point, like being excited for the people you serve coming. Like it's often like, I think we've defaulted to like, well, it's expected that you're going to be here, so we're just going to give you the default. But being actually truly excited that when people, even at your own home, like when people walk in the door to like have a dinner or anything, like, are you excited for them to be there? Or are you kind of just like, hey?
Yeah.
And I think just that idea of like being very purposeful with like making them feel that they belong here is so crucial.
100%. You just using that example makes me think of last night. I went to dinner at my best friend's house and his wife, and we've known each other for over 10 years. And his 2-year-old daughter, the moment I walk in, Uncle Will, just like, gets all excited, right? Like that type of like, oh my gosh, I'm just so happy you are here situation. It's so funny because also I'm a big Jason Statham fan of his the Mechanic movie. And in this movie, engraved onto this pistol, it says Amat Victoria Karam, which means victory loves preparation. And a lot of the times that statement goes through my head when doing a project that I'm not excited about, but knowing that victory loves preparation. The more you prepare, the more victorious you will be. And I think it's the same thing to the example of what you're saying on showing up to that retreat or showing up to the welcome conference or, whatever the situation may be, is preparing for your guest's arrival, preparing for the people you're about to host, the people that you're about to allow and have the opportunity to serve and make moments with. That preparation is so important in order for the victory. I think to have that great guest experience, to have that 5-star review. So I want to go into preparation in terms of the foundation, pre-booking and first impressions. We've talked about this on the show in the past, especially my hotel days. But usually when you pull up to a hotel, you're judging. At least I am. I'm judging it the moment I arrive. It's kind of the same thing online. So I would love for you, because you and I, when we were talking about this episode, talked about how your experience, your ability and learnings from the industry and from the startup and from just all of your experiences is about building out these, amazing touch points, or at least making sure that these touch points, the 200 plus that you can create in this journey, are super crucial, super important, and actually have impact into your business. And so I want to kind of go into the virtual side first before actual physical arrival. Let's talk about like the top 10 touch points that operators in hospitality. I want to be very generalized. I don't want to think short-term rentals. I don't want to think hotels. I want to think overall hospitality providers. What are the top 10 touch points? And let's start with the kind of like pre-booking first impression that happens online.
Yeah, I've really been thinking of this lately, and I think I kind of, it's not wildly big yet, but I have this little newsletter. Newsy is my friend from a different industry. Eli Weiss calls it and I call it the Ministry of Welcome. But I've really been thinking of like, man, there's really like 3 welcomes, right? Early on, we have the welcoming to our brand, like, hey, we never met us before, but nice to meet you. And then you have a welcoming of, hey, they committed to be going to business with you transactionally, and they booked their stay. And then there's the arrival. But that brand awareness welcome, I think we all know, like, so much of it now is there's so much that leads to social media as a discovery tool. And whether it's they're seeing their friend post about their stay, or the brand themselves, like a Bullet Farm Treehouse, is just so viral that you're welcoming them to that. And I just have always said that hospitality starts in the DMs. Like, if you're a brand that's starting your hospitality when they show up, I think you've lost out on a lot of ways. And I've kind of been doing this like internal like investigation, like what brands engage. And so like I'll comment on their story or comment on something, and I love it. I say I don't love it, but in the sense that I wish there was more. But how often, and this is individuals as well as brands and properties, that they'll see your DM and then you see that they see it, but then they go away. And I take that to like the idea of like, if someone walks into your hotel for the first time and they mention or talk to you and you stare at them and then walk away, that you would never do that. And that's kind of how I feel, or I think people should start seeing as their engagement online. If you're not going to engage with this person who's took the effort to follow you, took the effort to engage, quite possibly they might be someone who might want to come stay. But if at the very get-go, you just don't engage with them, I think it's an overlooked touch point in that, like, hey, they might not think of anything, but you could also turn it and make it a touch point that turns into the booking and turns into or the relationship that you would want it to have. And so that's one that I just think is an overlooked touch point. I'm a certified under Will Guidera's Unreasonable Hospitality, and he talks about all touch points are positive, negative, overlooked, or reoccurring. And I think the DMs is just such an overlooked touch point that, like I said, don't leave DMs seen, like engage with it. And I guess that's the other, like, but going back to Run Gum days, like I was as we built the team, like very clear to our team, like this is not a publication platform. This is an engagement platform. So if we're not engaging, we're losing. And so and I think that goes back to that is like, we have to engage. And at Bullet Farm, we did some fun things. The amount of times I sent like videos to people that engaged that were asking questions like this, then had direct booking links that they could book with, that then eventually booked in that way. Like there's multiple. So I just think that it's a powerful way. If you're a brand, it's on most brands at this point, most properties are probably doing something on Instagram or social. And I think that's just a way to just think and remember, like, hey, your hospitality efforts start there before they're even on your website.
Well, I love that you said, hospitality begins in the DMs. Like that's such a great descriptive like point, right? Like it begins here. It begins in the inbox. But I wrote down as like, to summarize what you said, to treat your digital engagement the way you would treat it in a real life engagement, right? Like you said, that hotel example, someone walks in your hotel and starts asking questions and you just look at them and turn around. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't. Yeah. Unless you're like,
you wouldn't have a job probably. So.
Yeah. Unless you're like that restaurant that like intentionally makes fun of its patrons, or patrons, in that term. But it's such a, like, you would think, I don't know, this is just me kind of verbally processing. You would think a concept like that, treating your digital engagement or your digital interactions as if you were in like real life physical interactions, you would think that would just be so like basic knowledge, basic like understanding. Of course, I'm going to treat my DMs and my comments and the likes on my stories or whatever as if it was real life. But we've gotten so desensitized with social, I would say, like with digital media. It's just, it becomes like, oh yeah, like, just another, I think the dopamine effect is worn off, right? Like, I got a DM, I gotta,
I think there's some like social, virtual, hey, they're not even real people aspect. And you're like, hey, they're just some digital thing. And I think just that reminder, no, that's a human soul that spent effort reaching out to you is something that just, I think as hospitality people, we should be the most hospitable people on Instagram or LinkedIn or all that, right? Like it just, to me, that's like the obvious, right?
Obvious. Yeah. And now you're making me feel, I'm like, oh shoot, I got to get better at my responses, my engagement online, because we talk about this in the podcast side of, from our creators who are brand new and starting their own podcast to people like me who have been doing it for 7 years. It's hard because when you look at the dashboard and you're looking at the analytics and trying to see like what conversations are best and what's getting most engagement and what's, getting shared the most or listened to the most, you forget the number is a person, right? You just see like X amount of downloads. And we talk about it all the time because when I'll use Katie Klein, for example, she launched a show with us called Sweet Success and we're going over her numbers and she was like, oh, but it's only X amount of listens, right? And I'm like, get that 800 people count or download count in a room. That's a lot of people, right? Like that's a lot of impact you're having through what you are not seeing as real humans right now because it's on the dashboard. But really get that pull to get that audience into one collective space. It's actually a significant amount. So, and it's just like when, at Level Up Your Listing, this conference I was at, people who are new to the industry, like, oh, I just have one home. Or I just have this, or I haven't even started yet. And I feel like they kind of, they say, I just have this. It's like, no, you have a destination. You have a home. You are able to serve people. Like, don't get in your head and say like, I'm not $200 or whatever the glamorized vanity metrics is in this industry. But like, you have this opportunity to really impact people with one home, with 800 downloads, with whatever, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Get those people or get that into a room. Anyway, so it's something I'm very passionate about, and it sounds like simple stuff that we should all be aware of, but it's not.
And I think for me, it goes back to like when we were building Rungum, like part of me was like, yeah, you have to make it, you're trying to win them over. But at the same time, like I just need anybody and not out of desperation, but out of like, I need the people that are potential customers to want. And I think just the personal too, I wanted them to know that, hey, this is a human behind here, right? This is not just some big corporation. This is like me, and, because I think that's, people like connecting with people. And, I think I saw that with how we built Rungum. I think you see it for a lot of those founder-based properties, Bolt Farm Treehouse, Seth and Tori. Like, people engage with that really well. So.
Yeah, 100%. And Isaac French was one of those guys too, right? He was, writing personalized hand notes with cookies and all the fun things. And so I want to go into something kind of on our outline here that I think doesn't get broken down enough. And it kind of goes back into that preparation creates victory type model, but anticipation of guest needs, right? Like anticipating a need. How is that actually done through a digital experience, and like anticipating what people are going to ask, anticipating potential reasons why they're going to want to stay with you or be in that destination? Like, how do you actually properly anticipate digitally to then transfer into the actual physical reality?
Yeah, I think there's two ways that we implemented Bolt Farm. I think it was really impactful. And other ways, even at Rungum, is one, whether, the good and the bad of what you can use within social media, take it however you will, is that like when people follow you, you can also go see what they're about. And so there's that level of, and I remember Gary Vee's talked about this quite a bit, is the idea of like, you can kind of go in there and see their interests. I remember, not at Bolt Farm, but at Rungum, like I saw that this dude was really into Jeeps. And so one day he was a monthly subscriber, and he'd been a monthly subscriber for like 3 years. And I was just like, eventually, like he engaged with us so much. And one day I was like, who is this dude? And go in, he's like really into Jeeps. And just in the box with his monthly shipment, I showed like a little Matchbox Jeep. And like the amount of like callbacks, interest, calls, reviews based on just that little thing, because I spent a little bit of time learning about my customer, or a better way of listening. Like I was listening visually of what they're about. He 3 years of being a monthly subscriber. Like I could go afford a $2 Matchbox car, right?
Yeah.
So that's one. I think if you're in the digital space, like you can go see, as long as they're not private, but you could just also follow them because you're a human. You could do that. There's that level of like, you don't want to like make it be creepy and stalking type of thing, but you can. And the other way that I think super underutilized in hospitality, way more utilized in e-commerce, is using quizzes, right? And quizzes to get data about what your guests are looking for. And so often in e-commerce, you're like, hey, you do this quiz to find out what flavor you should buy or what your right size is. But hospitality, Bolt Farm, we did it through a video way of like asking questions. Yeah. To get them to like, hey, you should stay in the treehouse. But along the way, we were keeping track of every little thing. There's, hey, why are you coming? I'm coming for a romantic getaway. Are you, we'd ask all these little questions, which we could then take and utilize, whether it's through digitally, how we engage with them, but also like, hey, they say they really like this specific type of experience. And so when they show up, we have some data to start doing some things. And so I think those are two underutilized ways of trying to get some data to then prepare for their stay that could be personalized and unique. Like I said, I think more hospitality brands should do quizzes. One, especially if you have multiple types of properties or units, like people love talking about themselves. They love doing quizzes. Think of all like the times back, 15, 20 years ago, you would try to find out what Disney character you were. Right? Like people enjoy doing that, but then you get a lot of data out of that that you can utilize again in email communication or on-site deliverance.
100%. And I love what you just said with the data, because one of the tangents and kind of things I've been really thinking about, and I actually just had a conversation with CJ Stam with Southern Comfort Rentals yesterday, is people talk about data in our industry so much. I need to own my guest data. I need to do it. But it's not about the data specifically. Yes, the data is important. It's what you do with it, right? It's how you actually incorporate it into the personalization, the connection. Because as we're seeing in our industry right now, the brands, Marriott and Hilton and Hyatt and all these point programs, Bonvoy, etc., are becoming so popular. Expedia with One Key. People are now looking at loyalty as basically a loyalty number that earns points. And real loyalty is connection. It's how you use that data that people give you. And this is why I'm actually super passionate about the loyalty cycle. We saw it go from actual personalization using the data for moments like that. The Jeep example is a perfect example. And so having that being the standard to then loyalty shifting to becoming a points credit card / member number, if you even want to call it that, to now, like, everyone thinks loyalty is up here with that. I think we're in the cycle, or in the early stage of the cycle, shifting back to the personalization with the data. So yes, it's great to have 200 million plus members in your loyalty program, but how are you using that to impact true connection? And I think a lot of operators and people talk about data, but we actually don't talk about the utilization of it. So I think
what data you should collect, right? Like, did it make sense to have a quiz question be about like your favorite drink? And they're thinking about like what their stay is. No, they'll answer it though. And that's a data point you can now have, right? Like there's certain things. It's like what, and it's kind of going again, thinking about the touch points, like, hey, at this touch point of, hey, it's their second day. What is something I could deliver to them in that moment? Well, then that kind of, you backtrack them like, hey, at this point I could ask that question and they won't think anything of it. They won't remember that they answered it, but then, hey, they showed up and cherry Coke's on the table and that's their favorite soda. It's that kind of example, but it's like, it's taking like, hey, looking at your customer journey, customer map, thinking of the touch point that you can enhance. And then like, hey, how can what point do I need to like gather something to make that happen?
Yeah. CJ also made the comment to me yesterday, and I think you'll agree with this, in the term of a lot of vacation rental management companies have gotten into the habit of leaving a welcome gift, right? Where it's something on the counter. But 97, 95, 90% of the time, it's the same gift for all guests. So with that, you're missing the point of actually being able to use that data and change it up. You customize, and Nathan's checking in and he likes cherry Coke. So instead of doing a box of Oreos, let's do some cherry Cokes on top of whatever your favorite sports team type of note theme, right? Like, hey, like, Nathan, welcome to a slam dunk weekend. We're excited to have you, whatever type situation. But like that missed opportunity right there, right? Like getting that data is so crucial. So would you agree with that? Like if you're leaving the same gift out for every guest, you're kind of missing the mark, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where, it's hard to be one size fits one where you've given every specific person something. But if you had a toolkit of things that weren't always the same, but like, hey, you had 5 to 10 items that you're like, hey, this person's a little bit more into that. I think that can go a long way. I think the other miss so often is like you leave, or the gift is like a branded thing. So it's like, right. It's like, cool. Like I don't want to be a billboard for you. Yeah. But that's often too, the gift is like, hey, here's a journal with our name branded on the top of it. And you're like, well, it's not a bad gift, but it seems very also like brand versus the person.
100%.
But yeah, I think there's ways to make it scalable. So it's not like every time you're having to find a new thing, but yeah, leaving just the same thing. That's kind of goes back to like, with box of Oreos. Well, that person hates sugar. So they're not going to feel grateful for it. Or alcohol bottles of wines are left often, but I know you've made a big decision to choose to not that. So if there's a bottle of wine left, you're like, well, that's just going to stay there.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of things of like, hey, have a little toolkit of things that could be that arrival gift that would make people feel like, oh, they thought of me here.
Yeah.
And then occasionally maybe you do go crazy and you're like, hey, that person's really into the Denver Broncos. I'm going to get something, it's one of those type of things where you can occasionally, and those are like the fuel to keep you going sometimes.
100%. No, I love that. And I'm curious, before we move into post-booking and pre-arrival stuff, I know we kind of covered some of it now, but is there anything else pre-booking even that, like, I love what you said. Like, I think one of the key takeaways from you in this episode is going to be hospitality begins in the DMs. I just love that statement. But is there anything pre-booking that you think could be another really crucial touch point that can just really make you stand out from the competition, from your local market, from the lack of service and hospitality in the world that we're in today anyways?
Yeah, I mean, I think just one way that as I've talking more and more brands, and this goes is just how you utilize your email or SMS list, right? And whether you're using it and you're putting them into more of a nurture flow to have them learn more about you or get them to take some action. I think, there's that part, like we have to be also trying to build business and doing that in ways where it's like, hey, yeah, you grab their email. And this is just something I think I do too. It's like, I'll go onto their site, I'll put my email in. It's like, I'll never get a message from them, never get anything. And like, it goes back to like, I put my email into your system, which in this day, like, I know I'm looking at it differently, but like people are hesitant to do that. So if they're going to do that, like, how are you going to use automation and things? And that works. Like Bullet Farm at one point when I left, like we were at 30-40% of our revenue was email. Half of that was the welcome flow that was just automated. And so I think that's something that hospitality still needs to, and not have it be just a transactional thing, like have it be something that's like starting to build that relationship. So at some point when they're ready, whether it's 90 days or whatever, they're like, all right, like that's where I want to go because of those engagements. And you can do things with video and all that. So I think that's just a missed pre-arrival, like just do it. You need to, there's so much lost opportunity by just not building that out. And it takes effort and time. And I think that's, I got to do it in e-commerce for a long time. And you just learn that like it's not as common in hospitality.
Yeah, I was going to say the question I kind of did have queued up for you before recording, which is a tough one because I'm a believer in the automation piece. I'm a believer in AI. I know also, like, I listened to a podcast that Will Guidara was on, and he talks about like there is actually a huge opportunity for AI in hospitality to take care of the stuff at scale that just were meaningless tasks, that were more busy work type oriented things. But with that and like focusing on the intentionality and the personalization and the utilization of data and naturally how it applies to creating good moments for your guests. How I'm trying to phrase like this question specifically, but do we lose that when we bring in automation and tech and AI? Or because I know there's going to be people listening who are like, yeah, I got my automated messaging set up and my AI, chatbot connected to my PMS and they're going to think like they're golden and like the money's raking in and they're happy and life's good. But like at the end of the day, they're getting, 4-star review here, maybe a 3.5 star there, and whatever, but they're missing that connection point with their actual guest. And so, yeah, I guess how's that balanced?
I mean, I think it is the challenges that we're running, especially in the AI of like, how do we do, because there's so much efficiencies in that and power in just having a machine do it. For me, I think there was always this like aspect of leaving a level of I won't say always personalization. I think with data, you can do segmentation to make it more personalized. Like if someone said they want to come stay in the spring, don't send them stuff about thing in the fall.
Yeah.
Like, right. Like if they showed that there's some like you can show hospitality by just giving them the information they came for. I think, that's where, and this is like, this is a little more post arrival and it could fit in the same way.
Yeah.
Or post booking, I would say. But like, you can still do some automation things that take some human element. When I was at RunGum, when someone signed up, every new customer would funnel into this app called Bonjoro. And Bonjoro is like this video based, I don't know if we've all kind of seen them from like the SaaS world. Yeah. But like I did it in that world. And so someone purchased brand new customer within 2 days, myself or someone from our company was sending them a 30-second to minute long. So it was personalized. There was data, there was automation part of it, but it still took a human to like, all right, like this is a big moment. Someone just chose to buy from us and choose us. And we want to affirm them in that point. And I know this is kind of transition, but I think you can do the same, the pre-arrival to some level, or just being someone like, hey, someone's going to reply to this, or I, as the founder, is going to reply to this if you have any questions. Just giving that affirmation. Like, I think so many times you see emails from hospitality, it's like the no reply at. Yeah. Like, well, that's just automation, but if there's a way that like they can feel like, hey, if I email here, I'll get a response.
Yeah.
I think there's aspects of just bringing, you can't do it all, but it helps to have some systems in place so you can be more. And if you have a lot of that data, I guess that's important too, having all that data. So when it's time to be personal and it's all in one spot, like, hey, I know that they've already engaged with us here, here, and here. They've checked out or they've looked at the site. There's just something we can have it in a spot as a dashboard to then show up to them instead of like, hey, yeah, and you're asking questions about like, when did you want to stay? But if you already knew some of that, like you can just show up a little bit better when it's time to have a personal thing. Yeah.
I love that.
I think you've seen a lot of that on Instagram. It's like, or LinkedIn, especially in hospitality, it's like AI ideas to get to a spot so we can, all the monotonous logistics can be AI'd so that we can show up better, more personally.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think we're trying to figure out what that means still.
Yeah. I think 100%. And it's one of those things is like, you got that binder, from a guy of like all the people that are going to be coming in. You need to know this information and know their name and know what they look like. We had a similar experience, and I know there's software out there. It's basically getting this data aggregated into a spot that is understandable and clear. Because again, one of the statements I've said on the show many, many times, almost too many times to the point where I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but a lot of us I didn't get into hospitality to run a podcast and to do this. I got in hospitality because I loved people and I loved the industry. I loved the moments. I loved the smile on people's faces when I got to watch my team execute good hospitality, right? Like, it's like, oh my gosh, like just getting to watch Victoria over there, like at the front, in the front desk lobby area, have a guest reach out to her personally and say like, I'm back because of how well you took care of me last time, type situation. We didn't get into this industry to be tech founders. A lot of us didn't. There's people listening to the show that are tech founders and they got into this industry to help solve these problems. But a lot of us who are actually in the front lines or creating these brands didn't get into it for the technology. We didn't want to become IT people, but it's shifting towards that. So basically, like, there's got to be a way for the technology to pull all this data, make it easier to consume, understand, and execute. And right now, I don't think we're there. Do you know of anything like? Yeah,
I haven't. I know people built their own things, which is kind of the case. But like, I remember like, how great if you were, this will happen, right? Like, Will is like, hey, you're about to email this guest or have a conversation with them or about to have a phone call. But they've engaged, you have the system because your CRM set up has a bunch of data and all you have to do is ask a little GPT of like, hey, tell me some facts about this person. And then you're ready for a conversation with like all the information, or the worries or concerns they might have. I could see that being like, especially from like the guest experience support people of like being able to ask some GPT of like, hey, there's a lot of data over here about when they've been to the website, what they were looking at. It might take a long time, but just give me this quick bullet point so I'm ready to have that conversation.
Yeah.
I assume something like that will come.
Yeah. One of these days. Well, if anyone listening knows of anything, please send it into the show. But one of the things I want to talk to you about, kind of wrapping up the show, I know we had a bunch of other points, but the thing that I do know for a lot of the people that either listen to the show or that we kind of get to engage with, we don't all have the opportunity to be like Seth and Tori at Bolt Farm, where we get to be on site at location with our guests. And a lot of these managers or property management companies or even hoteliers kind of have like this humanless interference almost, like where it's, you get a door code, you have the Wi-Fi on a guidebook, a digital guidebook, etc. And there's really kind of a remote hospitality kind of core to the business post-COVID. I'm curious, mid-stay engagement and keeping that preparation of their arrival alive and that magic alive in their stay. Do you have any proactive tips or even just ways that digitally we can keep that interaction going without having to be intrusive and like getting those like horribly spaced out text messages that are like, you could definitely, whatever the type of situation is. But like what are the mid-stay engagement touch points that are crucial for a remote hospitality business or even a business that is less invasive in terms of like dispersed inventory versus everyone in a lobby or a hotel?
Yeah. I think, and I haven't been I haven't had a ton of experience as a operator or as a consultant in that space, but taking from other things, right? Like where could you show up? If you would think that if you're a very digital based like you are going to rely on data more. I know not all can. I know that if you're utilizing the different Airbnb platforms and all that too, like you might not get any of it, or you might make it hard based on what you can get if you don't do some other survey to get something. I remember this was not related anything to hospitality in the sense of the industry, but I worked with an outfit that was doing a retreat, an insurance company that was doing a retreat, and one of the things that we were talking was like, how can we show up mid-stay? And it was, well, we sent stuff, right? Mid-stay, we sent something. Like you knock at the door and we did flowers, like mid-stay, like every door got flowers. So there's certain things you could be like, hey, mid-stay, there's a moment that I think you could do still in the selfless of like, hey, if you know their favorite drink is something like, hey, you know what is really big is Uber Eats and DoorDash and all these things. Like you could send something to their stay while they're there, and that makes them feel like, oh, they thought of me and they're doing that. And I know you can't do this all the time. Like these are like, maybe you have to pick or choose or find those moments to do it.
Yeah.
But I think there's ways that you could deliver something that's very special and unique that feels like a moment that they get to have. I think I've been at a place where, hey, post stay, and this kind of get into more of the post stay side of it is like, I got, as I'm the night before checkout or morning checkout, I forgot, it wasn't a short-term rental. It was more of an event is, hey, you have a long way a long travel back. Here's a digital gift card to Starbucks, right? Something like that, where it's like, hey, it's a $5 expense, but you could send them a little gift card because you have their contact or whatever that I think could be, or you don't even have to do that. It's just a link that they go redeem. That could be something that makes them feel like, hey, this is more than a transaction.
Yeah.
So like I said, I haven't spent too much in the selfless checkout kind of space, but I think there's ways that you can be purposeful to look at a touch point and be like, hey, you can digitally send people stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Or you can use digital stuff to utilize sending people things. And so I think there's, that's the fun thing about doing the work is like, that I got to do now is like sit down with somebody and be like, what are all the touch points that you have? And then like, let's think of this one. Let's focus on this one. And like, hey, what's the crazy ideas we could do? What's the more of the medium and what's the low hanging fruit that we could start doing? Because what's on brand, what is culturally, what's your regional things like that can make it the impact.
Yeah. And what you just said really does bring back a previous conversation I've also had on this show with Richard Walter, where talking about hospitality brands really aren't lifestyle brands. So they're not like Nike or Lululemon or Apple, iPhone, where, right? Like they're in your life and you think about them as a product and a brand throughout multiple moments throughout your day. To be honest, I'm constantly looking at my Nike. I'm constantly looking at my iPhone products or my Apple products. And as a brand, they kind of own part of my lifestyle. Yeah. But a lot of hospitality brands don't do that. But the post-stay engagement that you do with your guests can create that lifestyle brand moment for your company.
And I'll give one example. If we did Bolt Farm real quick, that is kind of a mid-stay thing that we provided to them that we hope it carries on. Bolt Farm is very much about couples disconnecting so they can reconnect. And what we created, they're right here, and they still do them. Every guest got these reflect branded. We made these, we designed these reflect and connect cards, which are conversation starters, right? Something that while they're there, they can utilize. They can have moments of going through these questions with each other to reconnect. But now they have something to go home with. This is $2, right? $2 to get these made. And now they have something to go home with to have, hey, whether it's date night or around the table. So I think, there's, again, a little bit of creative effort, like, and the amount of reviews and images that we got of this, which is someone who's like, don't call myself a designer, but I had to learn how to design. I'm like, dude, it's pretty sweet to see that in other people's posts, right? And I know it's still an impactful thing they have. And so I guess that's one thinking back is like, hey, is there something that's you can leave there that they can take home that does remind them of their experience with you from a brand perspective, but also creates the moment that they're desiring to have while they're at your place.
100%. And one of the best, and not one of the best, the best way of marketing or avenue of marketing is word of mouth. Still word of mouth marketing is going to compete
100%.
and trump, digital, all these other things. And the amount of stories that's going to be told when they have other couples come over, right? And like they play this game together and have a glass of wine. And now it's like, oh yeah, well, where'd you guys get these cards? Well, I got them at Bolt Farm. And Bolt Farm, where's that? And they're going to tell them about the amazing experience. And like, there you go. Now you've just created 2 new potential loyalists based on that experience that they haven't even felt themselves. They just got to hear the story through their friends that they trust and already know. So I think it's, a great example. And I just think there's so many other creative ways that if we stepped out of our businesses, right? If we stepped out of what we know, got out of our bubbles, we would, and looked around us, looked at the world around us and creative things like that. I think we would be surprised on like how creative we could really get in such a challenging landscape right now. I think with,
I think that zoom out again, I think in the more and more I talk to properties, it's like that zoom out and like it might take, a gigantic piece of paper or, digitally and like mapping out like I say, this is the part of touch points from like, hey, the arrival, the emails, the walking the room for the first time, walking in the bathroom, and mapping out everything. And that's where it's points like, there's so many more touch points that you have with your guest, both personally, both digitally, both just in the physical sense of where they're going within your space.
Yeah.
If you don't see it, then it's hard to get creative. But the moment you can zoom out, lay it out and see it, you can then zoom back in and be like, all right, let's focus here. And I think that's just an opportunity that whether you're running a podcast, running an insurance company or running a property, that like that exercise of like, how are we engaging at the different times when those different moments, those different touch points with those we serve internally as a team, like, how zoom out as a leader, like here's all the touch points I have with my employees from onboarding application to whatever. Like, I think it's just such a powerful like practice of doing. Yeah. Because you can then zoom in, but if you don't zoom out or get out of the business to start doing that thing, then it just looks messy.
Yeah. And no matter what type of person you are, because a lot of people talk about visionaries and integrators and EOS and these things, no matter what type of person you are, whether you relate to a visionary or integrator or whatever definition of a entrepreneur, I think we all get excited when we can zoom out no matter what and can get inspiration of like what can actually change our like what makes our business unique. It's not just cool to be an entrepreneur anymore and just have like a business and work for yourself. It's like what gets you excited about that business? What gets you like those little moments are way more impactful to me as an entrepreneur than the yearly review of my P&L, seeing the profit that we made or seeing like, yeah, that's great. That's a byproduct of that. But the daily, like you and I before this call, we're talking about, Joanne on our team and how he's like, how excited I was that he told us on our team call just about the ability to buy his own place and to like, you get to zoom out, look into those little moments and you're just like, oh my gosh, like that's so much cooler than like what we actually do, like it's just it's a true inspirational moment, I think. And I think a lot of people are listening to this show now can understand that when you get excited about those little details, it just makes everything else a bigger picture. Or as you'll enjoy this analogy or kind of anecdote. But when I was getting discipled and I was getting ready to go to Bible college and all this stuff, my pastor would tell me, he was like, Will, a lot of the times, especially for you, he was being very specific with me. He was like, a lot of the times you're looking at the hourglass, or not the hourglass. What are those windows called in the like old churches where it's like a bunch of pieces of glass? Kind of creating
stained glass windows.
Yeah, stained glass windows. Yes. So he's like, well, a lot of the times you're just looking at one piece of that stained glass window. You're not stepping 30 feet, 300 feet back to see the whole beautiful picture. And right now, I think a lot of us in our businesses are looking at the one piece. Because if you look at that one piece, right, you look at it close of that stained glass window, it's foggy, it's broken, it's cracked, it's not a beautiful piece of glass. So you're like, oh gosh, my business is a mess, it's horrible, da 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 da. But then you step back further, and that whole beautiful image, whatever it may be, starts to appear. And so, yeah, getting away from the one piece of stained glass and looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Sorry, little tangent.
Yeah. Will Guidara talks about often too, of like, certain things you systemize, you build the toolkit. One, because you might need like a system to be more hospitable. Like I think there's a lot of people in the hospitality space. They built it, but they're maybe not naturally hospitable. Yeah. So you built this toolkit, or whether it's for someone member on your team, you have this system in place to do this certain thing. But I think there is something very, very innate in us as humans. As we do more things to make people feel welcome and they belong, it feels really good personally, to a point. Then you pay attention and you do that. So the point where the systems are kind of not important anymore, because you've built the culture of like, this is what we do. We listen, we pay attention, and we go after trying to make people feel they welcome and they belong. I think that's the beauty of like being systemized or AI driven, is that it gives us the opportunity to have those moments to make people's day, to give them the magic. And that just, I think we all get inspired by when we get those opportunities to do that. Some of us are more natural at it. Some of us need more of a system, or like hey, I do this every single time at this moment. But I just believe that you do it more and you start building that muscle. It's like, all right, then you're going to start. I think it's similar to the idea of like, hey, a gratitude journal, and doing that at the end of the day, and thinking, hey, here's what I'm grateful for every day. You then begin to find things throughout the day that you're thankful for. Right. And so it builds more of this positivity, because you're realizing like, hey, at the end of the day, I need to be like paying attention. So you are paying attention to your day a little bit more. So I think it's the same thing with providing hospitality. It for sure grows.
Yeah. And like when you're doing that gratitude journal, you start to realize the things you're grateful for are all the small moments and the small details that aren't really these big grand gestures. But the moment you remove those small details, those small moments, you start to realize you're missing a lot. And so it's the same thing with hospitality. Your guests notice like when those small details aren't there, there's something missing, right? Like they'll notice when it's not missing, but they kind of almost don't notice until it's actually gone. It's not going to something that's fully not expected, but celebrated when it's happening. But
this is another tangent, but same idea. And I know we're kind of going off. I
love it. We can go off script all we want.
you had before show, you talked about kind of your true right now, your definition of hospitality. And for me this year, like my definition of hospitality, and this goes to exactly what you say, is just the idea of salt, right? Salt is this product that does two things. It enhances flavor and it preserves, right? When it's not in a dish, you notice it. Like when something's missing, you're like, there's just something missing here. But the moment you add the right amount of salt into something, it brings out flavor and it brings out the best in that thing that you put it in. Like a steak is great. It's better. And it's at its best when it's perfectly seasoned, right? It's perfectly salted. And I think hospitality is the same. Of like, we can have the most spectacular venue, most spectacular rooms, but if there's not this element of hospitality, that's like, it's like, hey, there's still something missing here. But the moment you add the right amount of hospitality, the other aspect of, hey, if we're trying to make it about ourselves and we're the salt and we throw too much of it, we just ruined it, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea is, hey, as leaders, as people in hospitality, adding the right amount of flavor to the dish, whether it's our property or to the people that we get to serve, so the best is coming out, I think is what hospitality is. And then ultimately that's is what preserves the relationship to build loyalty. And so that's been kind of I can't shake it, man. This idea of like hospitality is salt, and that it brings out flavor and it preserves relationships.
I love that. That's incredible. And I think on that note, for the listeners, we're going to end on that, because that honestly is like the best, like it's such a great description and definition. And I think there is no right or wrong answer of what hospitality means to you, but that right there is just chef's kiss. I give you a 5 out of 5 on that. Nathan, one of the just questions we always end up asking our guests and leaving the episode on is like, I know there's a ton of listeners who are probably going to be re-inspired or hopefully re-inspired from this conversation as much as I was. Getting to know you, getting to connect with you has been great, but where can the listeners themselves do that? Because I think this is just the tip of the iceberg conversation that's going to get so many people reimagining just their business and their properties and their projects even deeper, but would love to give you the opportunity to send people the right direction.
Yeah. I'm in the early stages of building my coaching, consulting business, which is all under the framework of Will Guidera's Unreasonable Hospitality. It's belovedhospitality.com. That's kind of the just the generic website. I am writing, as I mentioned, kind of a little bit, not as frequent as I should be, at ministryofwelcome.com. And I would say it's more of the peel it back ideas of hospitality. It's not as much of the let's do it, execute it. It's more like, why are we doing it? I know you'll probably get some of the LinkedIn and all that. It's funny, direct consumer world, it was almost 100% Twitter back in the day, building that, our e-commerce, and LinkedIn is obviously where hospitality space is. And I've loved kind of just the engagement that hospitality people have on LinkedIn. But yeah, those three, belovedhospitality.com, ministryofwelcome.com, and LinkedIn, Nathan Woods.
I love it. I love it. Super easy, super great. I love hearing what you're doing. And just, thank you so much for taking the time. I just want to give you your flowers in this episode for coming in prepped and coming in with these notes and helping come up with this outline, because I think a lot of the times, yes, a lot of the listeners know I love to just have conversations with people and kind of be unscripted and uncurated. But for me, I think this theme of the top touch points for hospitality businesses was such a well timed kind of structured episode. So thank you.
I think we need a round two because we got to mid-stay. We didn't finish
I know.
check out and post-stay. So
yeah, we got a couple touch points from there. So we'll definitely have to do a part two. But Nathan, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on the episode today. For all the Slick Talkers, make sure you grab the links in the show notes. Show Nathan the same love that you show us each and every week by liking, subscribing, and following along his journey as well. Nathan, we'll see you on the other side and for part two in the near future. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our show partners for making Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, possible. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we would love to connect with you outside of the podcast. So you can follow us on all of our social media channels for daily hospitality content, or find us on slicktalkthepodcast.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm your host, Wil Slickers, and we will see you guys all again next week.